Welcome to Northbound Alaska, the Trucking Files, a podcast where we talk to haul road drivers, both past and present, to carry on the knowledge and experience of one of the toughest roads on Earth.
On this episode, we sit down with Shaun Pierson. Shaun's family came to Alaska in 1968, started driving the haul road in 1979, and has well over 1 million miles on the haul road alone.
We're here with my Uncle Shaun, or T. Shaun. I guess you've got quite a bit of history in Alaska. You weren't exactly born in Alaska, were you?
No. We came to Alaska. The family came up in 1968, and we moved to Homer.
1968?
Yeah.
And you guys came out of Minnesota?
Yeah,
is that right?
Minnesota and Wisconsin. We lived a little bit in Wisconsin, and then we left there to go to Minnesota. Drove up in a 64 Plymouth station wagon with everything we had in a U-Haul and a brand new Scorpion snow machine.
What is in the summertime of '68? Do you remember what month?
School had already started, so it was just right into September, middle of September.
I almost wonder if they come up with the Borns.
Yeah, because it was right around then.
They got
October.
to Fairbanks in October of '68.
Yeah, so it was.
You guys are playing leapfrog up the Alaska Highway.
Yeah. And it was wet and rainy and snowy, and I think we got somewhere up into Canada, and the hitch broke on the back of the. Dad had a hitch welded on it in Wisconsin, and it wasn't enough for that road, and so we had to stay somewhere and get that hitch welded on, and. Had a swimming pool, so we stayed there for a day or two, and it just rained the rest of the way.
Do you remember where that was?
I thought it was Regina, right in that area there as we came up, through the Dakotas, and then went up the rest of the way,
So how many siblings do you have?
The four of us came up with Mom and Dad, and then I had two older sisters that stayed in the States when we left.
So there was four of you kids in the station wagon.
Yeah.
And what color was the station wagon?
It was red, steel dashboard, no seat belts. For 64, they didn't have a lot of that safety stuff, except your mom's arm.
Yeah.
It always went out like a railroad crossing when you hit the brakes. Thought the brake pedal was hooked to my mom's arm, We used to stand right next to her when we was kids,
And you guys made it?
We made it. Chewed our way all the way to Homer, and it was beautiful. I that first morning we woke up, I was like, man, this is a place. I could see the spit and the inlet and the mountains and all the glaciers. But it wasn't quite what my mom was expecting, because our house wasn't ready yet that we were supposed to live in. So we moved out on the East End Road for, a week or so until the place we were supposed to rent. There was no running water in that cabin. And Mom was about ready to take us kids and head back. But a couple of nights looking at that Cook Inlet, and she changed her mind, and, she lived there all her life until last year.
Man.
What was your dad doing for work in Homer? What brought you there?
Dad had an education degree also, and he decided that he'd go to Alaska and teach. And he started in Homer, and then we later moved to Kenai, and that's where he retired. But
I never knew you guys lived in Homer.
I loved it there,
How long did you live there?
A year and something, and then opening came into Kenai, and then Dad got a position in Kenai, and we moved there. So when we drove to Kenai, and we had an apartment out there north at Wildwood, and we stopped at the Little Skimo, a little hamburger joint on the edge, right at the edge of town. We went up there, and Dad pulled up in there, and he said to the lady, said, "Hey, we're looking for Kenai." And she said, "You just drove through it." We turned around.
Oh, man.
But
How long were you guys in Homer until you went to Kenai?
About a year, just one school year, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we started the next school year in Kenai. I started, I think, 5th grade there.
Okay, so you're like 10, 11 years old.
Yeah.
And your parents never left Kenai, did they?
No.
So what was that like for you coming out of Minnesota and then coming to Alaska and experiencing a winter up here, that first winter in Homer? What was that?
Well, Minnesota, it was cold there. I remember as a kid it was just frigid, But we always got bundled up and went outside. We always did snow machining and deer hunting, Dad, And then Homer was a lot of snow, but maybe not as cold, But we did a lot of winter sports and snowshoe baseball and stuff like that a town would do. It was only 900 and some people living there in '68 when we got there, and but I loved it. I was riding my bike out the East End Road, 8, 9, 10 miles, alone. Once I got on a lake that wasn't completely frozen and I was trying to ride my bike, no snow. And there was holes in the lake like this that hadn't froze up yet. And I was just kind of going around all these holes. Nobody knew where I was at. I was supposed to have been home, but I pushed my bike down through the woods to this lake. They call it the Float Plane Lake, right down there going onto the spit. So I was at the far end of that thing, and I pushed and rode my bike all the way to the road. Pushed up the hill and then rode home. My mom was like, I probably wonder where I was at for 4 extra hours,
Wow.
I had a lot of ice stories that could have turned out bad.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
So then you guys moved to Kenai, and how long were you in Kenai for?
Well, I was there till, I believe, 79. And then I went to Fairbanks and did a little schooling up there, did some small jobs, and that's where I met the Fowle brothers, John and Joe. And it was just like a magnet to them, too, because they were the same kind of people. Me, they body shop, snow machines, I walked in there, and Joe's got a different story about that day. But John was over in that corner working on a Yamaha. And Joe was somewhere in that other bay down there, and he was working on something, and walked in there with another guy and friends of theirs, and wow, got the looking around the body shop. I think they had a couple of them old wreck Frontier trucks in there. There was some remnants of that stuff. So I thought, man, the place I'm working at right now is not that great, but it was money. So I asked them if they, wanted to hire a body man or guy, and but then Joe called me a couple days later and said, yeah, I was staying at my sister's house, Neen and Terry,
So they weren't quite sure what to say at first. So like, who is this guy?
Well, it was a Saturday, and I think, back then we were just kind of cruising around, just having a great day. But
this was at the shop in North Pole?
Yeah, right there.
Were you working out in North Pole?
I was working at the old Adams Garage across from the old post office in the Neatest Restaurant.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That place was like, you couldn't get it any colder. It was actually warmer outside than it was in that building. It was 50 below.
Oh, that shop that's still there?
Yeah. There was no insulation. It was just nothing but cinder block.
Oh, okay.
And then most of the time, the furnace was out of fuel because it just had a 55-gallon drum that was mostly empty.
So you weren't even a mile away?
No.
So you probably knew them guys had that body shop over there?
No, I really didn't. I'd seen it because I worked on Eielson a little bit, before that. And, I just didn't know what I saw over there. But he said, well, let's go see the Fowle brothers. I was like, okay. And that's how I got...
And what year would this have been?
79.
79.
So I think they built that shop in, was it 78?
Yeah, it must have been really new.
Yeah, because I think they built that shop when I was a baby, but that's the shop that's by Napa there, Brown and Sons in North Pole.
Yep.
But that was none of that was the Elston was probably there, wasn't it?
That's right.
And that visitor center probably was there. That log building.
Yeah.
The log cache was still there.
Yeah.
That log cache is gone now. They tore that down, and that old log building I think is gone.
Yeah. I think the cache is still there. Grandpa built that cache.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Didn't he build a few of those around there?
He built
too?
a lot of caches. I don't know why he was the one doing that, but
Wow.
So that was called Brown and Sons back then, back in the
Yes.
70s, wasn't it?
The Napa.
Shoot, I remember Dad would say that sometimes. Like, go on down to Brown and Sons and get that spark plugs for the snow machine. That's Brown and Sons. And I think Aaron would be like, that's the Napa. You know?
I think they were Brown and Sons before they got the Napa.
Yeah.
I think the Napa came later.
They put that in, and that was really a big help to North Pole. Yeah. So we liked it.
Yeah, that's funny. So you guys were just driving around, or you decided to go over there and say hi to them?
Yeah.
Just walk in.
Then they had a couple of trucks to paint in there. They had an old rolled over fire truck, and they had a rolled over big, huge line truck, power line truck, big GMC. I told them I'd paint them both, fix them both if they just hire me for the price of one.
Really?
Yeah. But Joe said he'd hire me, and then I would do one and he would do one. And then I think John was working on, what was he? Oh, he was working for D8. I think he got hired on with D8 to move some nod wells for the drilling company, the TDC, you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And then it just grew more and more, and then Joe and I were down there working. Yeah, we worked 20 hours a day. I mean, it wasn't uncommon to work all day and then into the night painting and bondoing and putting stripes on, and just, pretty soon it was like, let's go home for 4 or 5 hours, and,
What was it like back then for the economy? Was times pretty tough right around then, or was it just
Well, during that time, I had money. I don't know how I did. I had a good job when I left Kenai, so I wasn't just flat broke, but things were pretty easy. I don't remember scraping much, but during that time, that's when shortly in that area the strike came between the Teamsters and the grocery stores and everybody that was involved in that. I don't remember the politics on it, but
so you're in your early 20s, come to Fairbanks and single,
yeah.
and so you met our dad and our Uncle John and started working for him doing body shop work.
Yep.
Was that just trucks, or were there cars too?
We did cars. Yeah, we painted cars, some Jeeps. I remember they had some Jeep bodies, just about anything we could make an estimate on and get some work in. Paint a car. We did seemed like we did lots of green construction work. Joe and John knew one of the green guys up the road there, and we got some work out of Valdez. One in particular, others came, but the snow load was so big in Valdez that it would just take the hoods and of these cabs of these trucks and push it in like this and break the windshield out, And there was a Kenworth day cab they brought up, and where the hood sits on them old Kenworths, it actually split that hood along that V that comes from the front grill. It actually split that thing, and then the hood fell down. And I fixed that. Fiberglass was, thick, and I ground all that out, propped that all up and fixed that and fiberglass that back. I got to be good at fiberglass. We did a lot of phone company buckets. Joe knew the phone company or whoever it was, line people, and he said, I got some work for you. To bring these buckets in. Well, they didn't have no side doors, and the bottoms were broke on them. So I had to squat down in there, and to grind the bottoms of them things, or lay them down and, lay them down and get in there with that grinder, and the fiberglass just blow over the top. I taped everything up and goggles and everything, and whether this is true or not, and Joe said, you know how to get that stuff off you? No? Come on. We'd go over there to Beaver Creek Lake there, and he says, if you get in there when it's ice cold, he said, I'll push it out of your pores. Well, he had me getting in that lake, man. I mean, just short of freezing. And I still itch after that. I think he just thought that was a lot of fun, get me in that water.
Make sure it's really cold.
But
That actually works though with fiberglass. Like if you're doing insulation fiberglass,
Yeah.
I've done that. Wash my hands with cold water and helps.
Dad told you the same thing?
No, he didn't tell me. I heard that from someone else, and then I told Uncle Dan about it, and Uncle Dan had no idea. He's like, "Huh, I didn't know that." He just always take warm showers. It's like, okay.
But I'll tell you, we did them buckets, and I mean, I was covered white in it. I mean, I had coveralls and tape and everything, but no matter what you did, you could not get rid of that fiberglass itch. You know, it was terrible. But I was glad to be done with that. But we did hoods, and lots of truck hoods, you know, put fenders, fix stuff, you know. So I did a lot of fiberglass, and I got good at it. I've carried it with me for a lot of years, you know. A lot of people can't fix fiberglass, and fix it right. But I was able to be taught by the best, you know.
Yeah, so they didn't really have any of their own trucks at that time, did they?
No, and then I think John came home a time or two, and he would, you know, and try to work a deal. It's like, hey, we could do this, you know. So I think John, I went down to Anchorage with John, and he bought that, which turned out to be the Boogie Motel, which was F-29. It was just a little 78 Peterbilt short, single sleeper, crawl through. And over the years, I've always wondered, you know, when they made them holes, they're like, well, should we make it that big, or should we make it a little smaller? We're not sure we're going to like this idea. So, you know, they weren't much, and then a little bit bigger, and, you know, and then now it's just like, whoa, it's a house back there. But, you know, I had a 36 with a crawl through when I first started driving, but that truck was kind of a cream and some sort of green and tan. It was pretty, and it came out of Bemidji, Minnesota, where a lot of my family's from there. And so then we bought I went in with John, percentage-wise or something, and we bought a 50-ton lowboy. And then he started hauling them Nodwells for the drilling company, and put that truck and trailer up there, pump 1, pump 2 in that area while they were doing the soils for the gas line that was supposed to start at 56 years ago or 50 years ago, however long it was.
So to go back to the sleeper, so was that kind of an afterthought to add these sleepers to straight trucks, and that's why these holes were so small, or what? Do you guys know anything about that?
Well, they probably had the little window to begin with, you know, a little back window, so they made that boot to fit the window. So the smaller the window was, the smaller the boot for the bunk was, you know.
I'm just wondering if all trucks were coming like that from the factory, or if they were making sleeper trucks back then, weren't they? Mm-hmm. So they probably all weren't like that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. All I know is that, you know, you had to work to get through there, you know. And them little older Pete's were pretty narrow, you know, because when I drove that old truck, and after we got the 2-speeds and the deep reduction, I think Joe taught me how, or John did. You get in that passenger seat and put everything in the deep reductions, rear ends and transmission. And it was easier when you had power steering, but I could back a truck into the blind spot by sitting in the passenger seat, you know, and just let that thing idle, because it was idling at a crawl. And you could look through that mirror, and you take that door and just move that door. That was the only power mirrors we had back then, you know. I mean, just move that door and that steering wheel and keep your foot close by that brake, and then you could back right into that shop off that side, you know.
What kind of motor did that truck? You switched the transmission, rear ends, and all that stuff when you got it?
Eventually, it had a big Cam 1 350, and it was just bone stock, so quiet, you know. And it had a 13-speed in it. It had a 12.5 13 in it, something like that. Nothing real heavy duty. It had rocker spring suspension, 4-spring, lightweight, and 38 SQs in it, or SSs, or something like SQs, I think. Probably good for, you know, lightweight work, but as soon as you took on anything beyond that, it was over with. 18, 20 some trips, man, it just bang. It's over with, you know. But we did go ahead once we started putting it on the line after the drilling job was over, you know. But Joe did buy that blue cab over from Joe Conlon at 76. And I just hated them things, but I loved them. Just something about a cab over. Just, they're sometimes they have a miserable side, but man, sometimes you look at them and you're like, man, that is so cool. Just something. I guess you just love a truck. It's all you can say.
Did you ever think you would drive truck when you were a kid, or did that ever come across your mind?
Well, probably didn't know the word drive a truck, but I've been around trucks ever since I was probably first grade. We lived by a train yard and lots of trucks, so I was, around that stuff. And after everybody closed, and I'd ride my bicycle, and I'd get on the fifth wheel plates, and they were all parked bobtails, and the very first truck that I really stuck with me to this day. We moved from we moved from Minnesota to Wisconsin in I think about 67, and Allied Van Lines pulled up in front of our house to move us, and they had an orange, and I can't remember really what kind of truck it was, but it was like gleaming orange, and the trailer was orange. Allied was just a brilliant color. And I walked around that thing, and I just looked at the headlights and the bumper, and that right there is a second or third grader. You're just like, man.
Were those cab overs, or were those?
I just remember had I just remember the magnificent grill, and it had 4 headlights. For that time of year. Could have been a Kenworth. I just can't remember that. But. And that really stuck with me all the years, But I guess in Kenai, I worked at a shop there, Northwood Motors, for a guy. He's long gone now. His name was Mel Stiers, and he had a shop, and he hired me through junior high school, summer jobs, and then after school, and then holidays and what have you. But Peterkin Distributors, they're out of Kenai, Bob Peterkin, and they were right across the street, so they had a lot of food service trucks. And then there was a guy there that I really liked. His name was Danny Williams, and he passed away not too long ago. But he come over, and I serviced. He had a Kenworth, his Bob's truck, and I think he had an International cab over. And he almost took me one time, but it was freezing rain, and he just decided, you know what, I'm not going to take anybody in case something goes wrong.
Yeah.
And but I got to service his trucks with him as a young boy, 10th, 11th grade, something like that. And then later on, when I was hauling fuel out of Texaco down there in the docks, he was down there. And I got to talk to him on the radio, Oh,
wow.
Yeah, and it was just like, holy cow. Here he's coming in, and I'm leaving out with a set of doubles, It's six some years later, probably. Yeah. And I actually did get to talk to him more than once, and that was quite something that I was able to, man, look at me,
He's like, really?
Yeah, and that was pretty amazing, but he had many miles down there too on the highway and the parks, and where he worked down that direction.
So how did you get into the truck, or when did you start trucking with John and Joe?
Well, first we started. Joe got the Kenworth, and both trucks were up there. So both trucks were with the drilling company, and so I was there in the shop, and we were painting the trucks. A lot of guys from running the road were getting over, hey, these guys out there can paint, man, these guys can paint. And I painted in Kenai. I learned from some super good guys, learned how to paint, learned how to mask, learned how to do it right, and I took that with me because and so when I went to work with John and Joe, that's the kind of paint jobs they did. I mean, there was no junk, and masking was good, sanding was good, everything was the best product, And so word got around, and so there was a line of people, I mean, I can't remember all the names, but I think the first one I was in with was Lyle Phillips's he's an older Peterbilt. I think he had one air cleaner, a lubrifier, kind of like my old F-29 did, and painted that. And I think there was a guy named Denny Larson, and there was others. And we would, take the sleeper back, take the stacks off, sand everything that was just, did a good job. The paint stayed on a Philco paint job on a truck. It didn't come off, And so I did that, and then when Joe was in, he'd take me out at night and show me how to drive a 6 and a 4, a 5 and a 4. He'd be over there, and we'd drive down around Mission in front of your old house, and then get up on the Richardson, and some of them was just the day cabs, with fiberglass jobs, And then I got to drive a 13-speed, and then there was another International with a sleeper. It had 2 sticks in it too, a haul road truck. And then Joe and John said, you know what, we're going to get you a job up here with us, and there's a night oiler job. And so we shut the shop down, got everything done, So I think in November of 80-ish, maybe, late winter, I went to Pump Station 5 as a night oiler for the drilling company, same ones they were working for. And, that was just that was a new world right there. So first night we stayed at 7 Mile, me and this other guy, we spent the night there because we left late. And he dropped me off at Pump 5 down by the airport. And I didn't have a badge or no way to get into the pump station there, or even I think there was a non-union camp there too, I think. But anyway, I stayed down there. There was an old salamander still burning when I got there. And, I just kept getting closer and closer. It was cold. In November, it was pretty cold up there. And it's pitch black. So finally, the crew came in up at the parking lot, And when I got to the light, I had melted the front of my coveralls, but my thighs and down by my ankles. I had pretty much brand new Carhartts, man. I was like, because I just kept getting closer and closer.
What's a salamander for somebody that doesn't know?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's like a Grove heater. It's a smudge pot. You put a little bit of diesel in there, and it has a stack like a wood stove, but
Something
it runs
to keep warm.
Yeah. And so anyway, somebody pointed that out, but. So here's the crew. They're all coming, and they're just getting off work. They're going to go in and eat, And the spread foreman was Dick Aubrey, and he had a patch over one eye. And I was like, hey, man, this is storybook stuff here, man. Anyway, and then the driller, and I don't know what his real name was, but I only known him as Grinder. And he was a short guy, and he was all dressed up in refrigerator and had the big beard, and he was just, a hat. And asked whatever. He found out I was a night oiler, And he looked at me, and he's a little bit shorter. I think they'd been already having a few nips, and they were, on the way in. And he looked at me, and he said, "If you use ether on Norton, I'll kill you." Now, that's a job interview. I mean, that's a safety meeting right there. Don't use starting fluid on his diesel out there on the location. To him, I was just another newbie, green hat.
Yeah.
But oh man, we never did the whole winter, but one time there was like do or die, and I got kind of in the area, just to give it a whiff, just to help this thing. We heated everything, generators, tarps, space heaters, everything, get that stuff running when it was below zero. But anyway, that he knew it. Next night he said, "You used starting fluid on Norton, didn't you?" But
Wow.
by that time he knew that I wasn't a crazy, but I said, totally yes, I had to. But that's how,
How did he know?
you can smell starting fluid. You can just smell it. It stays in the air. It stays on the air cleaner. It just has an odor. Because we took the can. I mean, I was like, hey man, this is a do or die. If we don't get this thing going before they get here, you know. So you must have smelt it, you know.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Wow. So it must have been 50, 60 below for that winter.
Oh
huh?
man, that was cold winter. It was cold, so cold down in Toke. We were down there, and one time I dropped a thing of antifreeze, a gallon jug of straight, and when it fell off the back of the truck to the ground, the plastic just went, and there's this green block of coolant. Whatever straight coolant will freeze at, I just had a hunk of green coolant on the ground.
Wow.
That's easy to clean up, huh?
Yeah, I just picked it up and threw it in the back of the truck, but how are you going to do? What are you going to do with it? Throw it away when you get to where you're going, I guess. But I drove that road all the way in the pickup for that whole winter and until spring, November to spring. And we drove from Pump 5, we would go to Finger, and then come back through, and then we would go to Dietrich or Chandelar, and that's how far the rigs were for us to fuel and get the snow machines fueled up, and the Thicals and all the nod wells that needed to be fueled up, serviced and oiled. And so I drove that road from the Shelf to Finger a lot, every night.
Every night.
Every night.
Wow.
And sometimes that Finger Mountain, one time we had a rig out there and the rocks had broke one of the wheels and tires. It had them solid rubber, solid tires, foam tires, and it broke it. It just broke a big chunk out of it. Plus it was so cold. And 40 below was about the last we could work. You couldn't hardly work much more than that. But so me and the night oiler helper, we went out there and had to change that tire. We had to jack that track up and then get the bogey up. And I was 6 bolts, maybe 6 or 8, inch and a half. We had to do all that by hand. In the pitch black, in the blowing snow, it was just crazy. And so we would do work like that at night. Today, there's not a lot of people that would do that kind of work.
Did you guys have headlamps or handhelds, or what were you guys using for light?
I remember having a headlamp, and you carried battery, like 3 or 4 or how many ever, 2 big D batteries, but you held them in your coveralls. But it's so cold it lasted about 10-12 minutes, and then the bulb was just so dim you couldn't see. But what we did for light was we'd pour gas and diesel in the salamander and then lift the lid, and then it'd have a 7 or 8 foot flame, and that's how we lit the location up, was with the couple of salamanders, with the flame going up there, and that helped. But we would just leave our pickup parked on the haul road. There was no way you could drive, and then we'd take a snow machine or a track vehicle out there and Finger on the west side where we were working. There's so many rocks and boulders. So you couldn't really get much speed out there with a snow machine because you'd wreck it and tear the tub out. And they did all the soils for that line.
How far away from the road were you guys working out there?
I would probably say a quarter to a half, at sometimes mile off there where the pipeline was going to run, and you couldn't see the road sometimes. One time, I remember coming back to the road, and our pickup just sat there. We left the flashers and the headlight on, and there were some guys on top of Finger, and they were putting their chains on or adjusting their chains. They were still running iron, and it was just blowing. You could barely see their headlights over there, but everybody's done that road. They've seen that kind of weather, what it looks like up there. But we were just happy and getting out there and working every day, 10, 12, 14 hours.
Were they drilling on the right-of-way where the oil pipeline is, the Alyeska pipeline?
Yeah, pretty close to that,
So they were just testing to see where to put the gas line in back then is all they were doing.
Yeah, what they were doing is they were drilling the samples, and then they were, in a lot of places, they were putting some sort of electronic devices in there to measure the temperature and, how we put these little tubes down in there, and they were metering, what it was looking like, and then somebody would go back, the geologist would go back and check them readings, and see what was happening. They wanted to bury it or keep it above the ground.
Huh.
And so back then, it was blowing quite a bit on Finger, probably on you guys, huh?
Yeah.
It seems like the last few years it really hasn't been blowing too bad on Finger. I remember hearing Dad tell stories about it blowing really bad up there, but it seems like this last winter, a couple times there was kind of resorted back to its old ways, but
Yeah, it doesn't seem as common as it used to be.
yeah.
Well, we have, and then from that time, going from basically the whole haul road to Prudhoe in a pickup for all that winters. I got to know the names, the old man, the hills, and we stayed at Pump 1. I stayed at Pump 3, 4, 5, and I think that was it where we stayed. And then as we worked further south, we stayed in town in Fairbanks at the Golden Nugget, and then we worked our way down towards Toke, and then we came into Toke, and that's where it got. I don't know. There's different stories about how cold it was. There's that station that has the men that have that big tower there, them two towers. They'd come into Toke. We see them one time. Well, they said they had 69 below out there, day and night, never changed. And them Nodwells were froze solid, and we dropped them off when it was a little bit warmer, and then it just kept getting colder and colder. So all the crew went down to Beaver Creek, and then they went down that direction, and they got themselves in a little bit of pickle, and then they all went to Fairbanks. And one of the spread foremen spun around and ditched a pickup down there, so the troopers were looking for this crew of all these crazy drillers, And me and the night oiler, this he was a younger guy. His sister worked for the company. I think he was married to her. She was married to Ben, I believe. Anyway, the boy was there, and he's from Galena, and we had drove so far from way up north on the haul road all the way down to Toke, and we just found a space to pull over and just take a nap. We didn't have a room yet, and so whenever you wake up, when you're really not sure where you're at, you think you're moving, and you grab that steering wheel and smash that brake and start yelling and sawing the wheel. So I did that, and I was like, ah, ah. And then the next thing you know, the boy next to me's got the dash, and he's like, ah. And it's just me and him there in the headlights sitting on an access road, like, oh, okay, back you go.
Don't say a word to each other.
I just went back over and leaned over because we were just exhausted after days, no sleep. But during that time, we waited for about 2 weeks for the weather to break. And Joe said that it was probably down close to minus 80 down there at the airport in Northway. We had to go down in there a time or two also. But, they had a Nodwell running. We had that thing cranked. It was, I think it was 653s or maybe something like that, diesel Detroits. I had that thing wide open. And so we'd come back every night, listen, okay, it's running. We'll go down there closer to the border and check another one. Well, the rig just kept getting slower and slower. So finally one night we went by there and it had died. So, oh man, because it just gelled up. The fuel, we were getting the best fuel we could there at the station there, But I would look down in our tank, and even in the number one, you'd have a clump about like this, looked like a piece of cauliflower starting in the bottom of a clear diesel tank. I know it was 70, if not colder, down there below. And I don't know what that'll start like or whatever, but so we tarped that thing with the parachutes, and we worked, 9 or 10 hours trying to get that motor, took that propane, and then we'd put that underneath the Nodwells caught on fire, so you had to be real careful. We'd take a propane and a heater pipe and put a 90 there and try to warm that up, make sure you didn't get all that oil and brush caught on fire. But we got that thing going, and we got it up to the road, and Bruce Lawrence, which I think he might have another name.
That's Ron.
Ron
Lawrence.
So he came down to get that Nodwell. We had it up at this motel there, and the clutch was so cold it wouldn't even move. We couldn't even get it on the Nodwell. So he had an old Sealand cab over, and so he's like, I'm going to bed. Wait till what daylight there was. And so I couldn't live in that pickup. It was too cold. I was alone then. The night older boy helper, he went back to Fairbanks. And so I hopped up in that, man, and it was just so warm in there, man. It was so warm. He just hopped in the bunk and good night. And I kind of leaned over the doghouse on that side, And, man, that thing, he had that thing running 21.5, 21.50. I mean, it wasn't uncommon to see that throttle all the way up there just to stay warm at 60, 70 below zero. He had a K in there, a big 450, I think, at the time. And so anyway, that morning, I don't know how we did it with a pickup, pulled that thing up there. I don't know. We got that thing loaded, and he took it off back to Fairbanks because we were rigging down going back. That's how I really learned all that road in a pickup. So give me an idea, night after night after night, going up and down, the Beaver Slide and over, the knob. And we went to the top of Adigan Pass. Had to go to Adigan all the time, just, man, you look at the northern lights and the stars, and it was just like, man, I can't believe I'm seeing this, I mean, just like, it was just so beautiful up there.
Yeah.
And sometimes it would be clear, no wind, nothing. But down at the bottom of the camp at the Adigan camp, state camp, there was a non-union camp there, and we'd go in there. There was a big cook in there. I met that cook later on at Vico. He worked down there at the Channelar camp, and we'd go in there because we were working for Fleur. And man, we'd get steak and good breakfast and ice cream and whatever they had, He was kind of lonely with nobody out there, sometimes at the tail end of that time, And then we'd get something to eat there, and then we'd drive down to Pump 5 and go into maybe we were staying at the pump station. I can't remember. Yeah, I think we were. And that's where we would spend the day sleeping, But we had a lot of good food and coffee and, whatever we wanted, pre-batteries for the, but that's how I got to learn the road first. That helped.
Do you remember your first time driving the big truck up there?
Yes.
How'd that whole thing come about?
Well, I rode with Joe in the cab over a few times because we shut the body shop down. And then when I was off for the drilling company, I think I got a chance to, I was not working there. So, I kind of worked with Ben's towing a little bit while things were going to develop, Did
he have the wrecker then?
Yeah. I don't think he had the big one, but he had a couple of them. And I worked with Ben, here and there, filling in. I think I started working for Wilner's Texaco in the yard till John was getting the cold foot, Philco stuff going. But I guess somehow I leased that F-29 from John. Somehow Joe taught me how to drive the road, okay? So I started going with Joe in the blue cab over. And my first trip with Joe, it was slick. We spun out on 39 on the Elliott, right behind another cab over, drilling mud haulers. He was up in that corner, and he went right into the ditch. So Joe's like, so he starts around that guy. And we just about get to his trailer, and we spin out. And it wouldn't hold. So he had his foot on the foot brake, and it was holding. The front brakes were holding. If he let off for the rest of the brakes to hold, it started moving. So I piled out of that thing, and I already knew how to chain up. And he taught me how to chain up. Man, I got them chains on that thing like lickety-split. And then he backed down on them, and then I got another set underneath him, and then we got going up the hill. But during that time, and I wish I had it, we talked about that, man, I had a notebook, man, and I was like, okay, 39-mile chain up, no matter what, and every hill, wherever we had trouble that first trip, because it was warm.
Did that truck have lockers at the time? Or?
There wasn't a thing called lockers most of the time back in the 38,000s, man, and, recaps. If they were siped, you were lucky, or mud loggers, I mean, that's how it started out. Now today you got scientific tires, and the guys, some of the old timers from Montana would stop there at Live and Good. A couple of them old guys in them Macs, they would bleach their tires. They'd get out with a gallon of bleach and they'd wipe them down. And I was like, really? And then somebody would say, oh, it rots the rubber. And I was like, well, I'd rather make it up the hill. I mean, I'm not gonna worry about the tires too much. But they swore by that bleach.
Really?
I don't know what that
I never
did.
heard of that. Wow.
A lot of the old timers, they would talk about using that bleach like that. And I heard, like, if you get stuck in one spot, you can bleach them and get out of your hole or whatever. But I've heard that quite a bit from back then.
Yeah. So
you're taking notes.
I'm taking notes. I don't even really think I had the truck yet.
Okay.
I don't think I did. I might have leased it later from John, or I might have drove it first. I can't remember. But I think that, anyway, my very first trip with them guys, I got us on went down there because it was during the strike and Mud Haulers was hiring. So I went over there to Drilly Mud Haulers. I'm just a kid from nowhere, drive through all these mad guys, and I go in there, and I said, hey, we got 3 trucks. Okay. Be here tomorrow morning. We'll get signed up. So anyway, I drive back out to North Pole, and John and Joe are out there, and we meet in that little front office, and talk it all over. And it's like, well, I'm going, Joe says. And John, okay, so we all went that morning, and, I can't remember if we went there that day in pickups and got all the paperwork done, but the day we went there in trucks to get our loads, they knew us. The guys knew, maybe not me so much, but they knew John and Joe because they were North Pole, but they were both union guys too. But we had to work, I guess. And that's what we did back then. And I wasn't in any union, and I needed to make some money and go to work. But so when we were supposed to load, John and Joe got the loads, and it stopped right there. I said, oh man. So they loaded, and got going. So the next morning I went into load, and I was all alone, and I loaded that truck 55,000 pounds of boxes of mud, strapped her down, and I was like going to the moon. And I pulled out there on the other side of Seekins, where that rail yard was, made that left and started up Hagelbarger, and I said, my brakes are still on. I was like, what is wrong with this thing? I'm looking in the back, and I had my back tires on my trailer painted up. It looked like a carnival back there. I was not going to drag a set, I mean, I'd been getting ready for a month, to do this first trip. So anyway, I made sure that wasn't happening, and I got up Hagelbarger and went down to maybe the scale was open or not, but and it was very cold. But when I got down to 39 on the Elliott, I was like looking at my book, all right, just going to chain it up for this hill right here, I stopped down there by that bridge. It was kind of anyway, I got down in there, and I was, just having a picnic. I was chaining up and having a great time, and man, this guy come around the corner, man, and just right by me. I was like, golly, it was cab over. It was an LTI, and I later learned who that was. It was Shanky, because and I was like, he's gonna do it without chains, and I watched him, all the way up, and I just stood there in the road and watched him up and out of sight,
He must have been pretty light, huh?
Oh yeah, probably feathers.
Yeah.
Something like that. A couple bags of mail, right? But and I chained up, and I chained up all the way there, and I made it up 1, 2, 3, 4, and I was down on 5, and I think it was getting pretty close to about 9 Mile to drop off. And a guy popped up, I think it was top of 9 Mile area, and he said, who you got there in that Mud Haulers? And me, man, hey, someone's talking to me, hey, this is, told Shaun, it was Lyle Phillips. He said, man, you can take that jewelry off, or whatever he said back then. He said, you can take that off, it's good all the way to the beach, I said, oh, I don't know. Anyway, I went down 9 because it was pretty steep, so I must have found a flat spot, took them off. So I made my way around, and I come off 11 Mile, okay, and I was just coming off there, man, just creeping off that thing, And so I got down there, and a little S-turn, I thought, oh, my gosh, another hill. I railed down on it, and, man, I didn't even get to, and I spun out. I mean, I didn't even get to that first left-hand
12 Mile?
Yeah, I was over with. I was going with 10, 15 mile an hour probably there, and I spun out. Man, I set the brakes, got out, another picnic, and I'm underneath that thing. Shoot, I'm down under the belly of that thing, latching the chains, and having a great time. Chain up and get going, and away I go. I was like, it's cold. I mean, the traction was like glue. And it took me 9 hours to get to the river. All the many times that I chained up and didn't know the road, I wasn't following anybody, all alone. And I got to the river, and I checked in. And but just before I died and froze to death, I woke up. Because I let that thing idle at an idle, and it was probably 55 below zero.
Oh, down there at the river?
Yeah. And man, my whole back and kidneys were locked up. I had the hypothermic shakes, I come out of that bunk and rev that motor up, try to get some heat in there, and then started the grind out of the river, man. And by that time, man, everything I had was, froze solid, tires, differentials, and I only got a few hours of sleep there, but it was so cold. And I made the hills, and I don't remember much more about that trip, but man, Prudhoe Bay was like, when I got there, I had won the race of a lifetime, my first trip, And then on the way back, man, all puffed up shoulders, man, I was like, man, I'm a trucker now, man.
Do you remember running into Uncle John and my dad when they were coming south? Or
God, I wish I could remember that. I probably do. They had to have seen me. And there's probably said, "What took you so long?" But they'd been up and down there a lot of times in their life.
Yeah.
I've never been up and down there alone, loaded.
Yeah.
The Blue Cab over is where I learned most of my driving with Joe. And I was his chain up guy, we would get up on Adigan or someplace, and we'd whoop. Because when you got a 350, when you spin out at 9, 10, 11 miles an hour, you're stopped. I mean, most of the time you can't hardly get it back very much, I mean, a little motor like that, it slips, and unless it's right again on gravel, I know I spun out, first time I spun out in that F-29, it was 13 mile. And I'm not superstitious, but it was 13 mile and 13 degrees. So whatever that is for you. But so big bunch of guys, we left mud haulers that day, and it was pretty warm in Fairbanks. And man, I felt bad. I knew my truck, and it just did not have the power of the guys I was running with. Some of them had big 400s, and maybe the 475s are breaking out, And I was following John and a bunch of guys, and I was in the back, and because I had the less power. I come off 5 Mile, and I was like, man, I'm white knuckles. I'm butterflies. I'm sick to my stomach. I was like, man, I need to put chains on. I really should. Oh man, looking great up here. Everybody's giving the high fives and slapping backs, and I was okay, make it down, get up. I think 6 Mile. Somewhere there's another pull up through there, and I knew better now. I knew it wasn't gonna spin out on 12 Mile, 11 and a half mile, whatever that was, and made it down through there, man. And man, I started up that next little grind right there by 13 Mile, kind of starts lifting. It's over with. I mean, there was no catching it. There was no nothing. And so, man, I got out. I was supposed to set the brake, set the trailer. And, see, I didn't know all the mechanics about stuff. Well, that trailer that I had rented only had pancakes on 3 axles. And so the only thing that was back there was leaky air cans or leaky air pancakes, And so I got out. I had 1 or 2 rings off the chain racks, and all of a sudden it was just like, here goes this, man, down she goes, man. I barely grabbed that driver's door, got up in them steps. All I could do was turn that, Sorry about that.
No,
All I
turn
could
the
do
wheel.
was turn that wheel. Should have turned it to the upside, but I just knew better. In my mind, I said, I've got to get this thing stopped or it's going to be a long ways down there. So I went right over the edge pretty quick, and I called out of the radio. I said, John, hey, man, I spun out. I got the roadblock right here at 13 Mile. So, yeah, you heard, oh, my gosh, the belly aching, because 5 Mile was loaded with guys and, So John backed down, he chained up, and pulled my front end around to the front and got me one lane, ready to go. And there was no way to get out of it. It tore off a landing leg and, knocked the bead off a tire. So somehow through the trapline hills, we got word to Fairbanks to send Rudy up from Motor Inn, And I don't know how long that was, but during that night, but he couldn't get me out. But up on the hill was, I believe it was a Kodiak oilfield hauler. It was a big boom truck, maybe a twin steer, I think. And he motored up through there and got over, and in that ditch, it was winter, he got enough snow pushed all the way and got up there, and him and Rudy together were able to get me up out of there, and I chained up and made it to the river and got my tire fixed, and away I went. But that was $800 back then.
Man.
But I didn't think that was too bad, I salvaged the tire and had to put a landing leg on it. But that's, I guess, when you feel like you probably should be chaining up, and no matter what anybody else is doing, because I didn't have the tires some of them guys did. When Michelin came out with that MS4, that thing was like razor blades. They hung onto that road, especially if they were, tire pressure was just right. But at that time, I just had a set of log luggers on, and I wasn't quite ready for that transition. And so there was nothing there. And no lockers,
Just the power divider, huh?
Just the power divider. And then by the time I carried across there between 5 or 6 other guys, and just about the time people's fan would hit there, and it was like a blowtorch on that road, the fan kicks on right there at the hard pull, and people need that cool that motor down, and a couple guys with warm tires and such, man, maybe they had a little bit more engine and a little bit more speed, but really that was the day I should have chained up.
How long were you hauling mud for?
Gosh, several years at least, and then John got the fuel business going. And really, I can remember the tanker business with Coldfoot, and then he started the bulk plant in Peruto too. So, I mean, that kept, his and Joe's trucks running pretty good. That was a good way to go right there. It just kept everybody going. But really, we got super heavy. I mean, we only had 400s, and I mean, other guys had 350s 10 years before that, but maybe, I don't know the weight, but man, when we went out of there, we knew what we were going to put on. 63,000, or pretty close to that is what we put on them tankers, and then we put the 4 axles, on the group there, so we had 50,000 on the drives, and that helped, to keep that weight right there, and that 3-axle tankers, and then we got that 4-axle tanker behind that 85 or 84. I went to driving that 84 model, but really I would have rather had the package from F29, because that first winter or two, that new 84, it didn't have lockers and it didn't have the right tires possibly for that winter, and man, it couldn't get up a hill.
Did you eventually put lockers in the Boogie Motel, or?
Yeah. We took them 38s out because they just broke too much, and then we put a set of Eaton 2-speed 44s in it. It was 529s and 390s, and had a double over 15-speed in it. So in 529s, you could still run 75 for like the ice cut, and then when you were on the parks down there, you could flip that thing over, and then you had your 390s, and it'd take you down about 3 gears. So, you ran about right here, speed limit, But, bobtail, if you put it up against the dash, it would hide a 120. Yeah, it would. It would just bring that down there like that. That thing was, But no, I tried that a couple times just for a science project, you know.
So why the Boogie Motel? Why'd you name that truck that?
Well, I listened to a lot of music back then, you know, and you know, I liked that album, you know, maybe by Foghat, you know, and the Boogie Motel was their album, and you know, I just thought, you know what, this has got, it's kind of like a motel. It's the Boogie machine, and you know, and I had Frenchie come over and pinstripe my pickup, and then I had him letter that bug shield at the same time, the Boogie Motel. Oh, he did a good job. I wish I had that back hanging on the wall in here, you know.
He was amazing what he could do, that work.
Freehand. He could just put something on a hood that was just, he was an artist, man. I mean, and $30, $25, $30, $40. I mean, really, it wasn't, he had his little wooden box and his brushes, and he lettered my pickup, put Don's name on it and mine on it, you know, and lettered, you know, did lots of pinstriping, freehand, you know. But yeah, he was good. That was really, I guess that's how I named it, the Boogie Motel, and had it on there for quite some time.
So what happened with that truck? How you ended up in another one after that?
Well, we ran the haul road a lot with that thing, and then John and Joe, John got state approval to haul tankers and doubles out of Anchorage, and so that was a big thing. So we made them pups. We put a turntables on a couple that were there, and then he put a fifth wheel on one. He had one modified and put a fifth wheel for a dolly, because you might have to split one, you know. But I don't think in all them years down in the parks we ever split any of them tankers. We probably should have, could have maybe. That freezing rain down there, I mean, sometimes you'd get to 80, 75, 80, 90 miles. You couldn't even turn the wheel. You just turn the wheel and go straight. I had cable chains on the front axle a lot of times on the parks down there, and chains all the way, you know, chains all the way to the pub. And everybody's pulling the H&H there and staying the night, you know, all the Sealanders and the Mammoths, you know, a lot of them were just camped there. Some of them would go up a ways and then drop a trailer and spend all night going up and back and half the way back. And man, I'd put everything I had on, and I'd come to Honolulu and East Fork, and the wipers were burnt into the windshield. I mean, it was freezing rain and I don't know whatever else, but the wipers would just melt into the windshield. If you've ever seen that, you know, running them for so long in that freezing rain and fog. Anyway, I'd go up Honolulu and East Fork, man. You couldn't even give it any gas. You could just idle from link to link, you know, because it was half-inch of ice on that black pavement, you know.
You're pretty heavy too, weren't you?
150,000.
With no power.
Yeah, a 350 big cam. But we did take that, and we did the block work, put maybe some pistons in it, changed the timing, bigger turbo. John was always experimenting with turbos. He'd take a half of this one and a part of that one, and we put some injectors in it. And at one time, I probably figured that thing had about 500.
Oh, wow.
And then it just got so heavy that I would probably break 1 or 2 head bolts a night, guaranteed. And I carried, under that bunk, I carried a full shop. I had a headset, water manifold pieces, 2 or 3 5-gallon buckets, a whole set of mechanics tools, and a lot of times just before the turn at Wasilla, where you head north, I would pull over there on the flats down by Knik and drain the water out of it and fix 1 or 2 head bolts. And through that big cam 1, it would break the top of the bolt off. The big cam 2 broke it off at the block when they broke their bolts. So I had a couple of welding rods, and I had them ground to a point, and I could go in there. The head was gone, and I could go in there if I could reach it. If it was on the outside of the block, and I could turn them things, you know, and to work with the way. So, and then I'd drop another one in there and tighten it as tight as I could. I couldn't care about 305 foot-pounds. I just tightened it with a breaker bar as well as I could. I'd quit chirping and quit losing water. Well, chirping and losing water, you know, wasn't that great, you know. And 2 sometimes on a trip. The only reason that thing would blow is we had the thing racked up to about 2,500 RPM. So I pulled about 2,500. But if you're kind of sleepy and kind of lazy and you stayed in it till, if you got it down around 18, if you got it down around 17, it would go beep, 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 beep. You'd start losing head bolt. 1,700, you guaranteed to break a head bolt.
Mm-hmm.
But, and then I did the parks, and then that's when John retired that off the parks, and we put it on the haul road with that new truck came in. That was an Anchorage to 84 with the 475.
So you guys had the permit for hauling double tankers back then? So they weren't doing that before that?
No, they weren't. They were truck and pupping them down there. And then when we were able to do 105 foot of trailers and with the gas. And actually, for the longest time, when they parked me there, pull me over at the scales, they'd always say, pull me in there, and I'd walk back there and say, how many axles you got? And I'd say 13. And, okay, you're good. And really only had 12. Finally, I remembered, I was like, I only got 12 axles, but I've been telling them 13 axles for a summer, you know? So I should have had 147 instead of 150, you know? They never got out and counted, but it was just nothing but axles when I scaled through there, you know?
That's hilarious.
But, I lost the transmission. We started that we started the parks down there with that 12.513 in it, and I had the deep reductions in the back, but we hadn't changed transmission. So Leonard was down there with the 84 or 82 or 84 he had, Peterbilt, the blue one. It was a nice truck. And I was following him. He had a Polar tanker on, about the same kind of weight, and a little more power. I think his head jacked up. But I was going to, like you said, the guys say, drag racing slow, And so Leonard started up out of Wasilla, and the traffic was right just for me, man. And I was in the high side because I had the 530, so on the high side, and the traffic was right, and I made that corner, and I was like, I'm going to push him up this hill, man. And that first pull out of there, I got her grinding. I could see Leonard, just like an old mule just going up that hill. And all of a sudden, bam! Man, that shifter's up and down and out, and oh my gosh, it nailed me in the side there. I broke the main shaft or split the case, and man, it was just nothing but garbage. And I said, Leonard, hey man, I blew a transmission here, And I said, wait, don't leave. And so I was able to grind my way up to Leonard, and then he hooked onto me with a chain and pulled me up into Wasilla area, and we found a wide spot to get in, and that's where we dropped that. We actually left that truck and trailer there with both trailers, and then we teamed to Fairbanks, and then we came down and with another truck on a lowboy, and then that's when John put the 15-speed in it. And then after that 15-speed was in there, that was a combination. That was a tough truck. I think that thing, we hauled 150,000 through everywhere, and that transmission it ran hot until we put the Frigid Go fluids in it. They'd get over there 300 during the summer. When I put that Frigid Go synthetic in there, 200 was it.
Wow.
Yeah, it took 100 degrees off that transmission.
Wow.
I was just adjusting some levels there.
Take a sip
of some water here. So
I'm going to take a break for a minute.
Yeah, let's take a little quick break. We'll be right back.
Copy.
We're actually in Oklahoma, and it's starting to get a little warm out here. Almost. It's May 1st today, isn't it? Yeah, it's May 1st.
Yes, May 1st, 2025.
Be sure you come close to that mic there. Not, you don't have to be right up on it, but I don't remember where what we were talking about there, but we were moving on up. You were talking about the parks and hauling fuel, and then
we had the tankers. We started in that year. We were competing against the railroad, and we were dropping at 2 Kobuk gas stations, and one was on Cushman, and the other was out there towards College. And during that time, I was just working, man. I mean, I was getting rich, if you can call making that kind of money rich back then. But I hauled 1.5 million gallons to them 2 gas stations in not a very long time, 6, 7, 8 months. And I hauled about 750,000 in diesel to Usabelli mine. So I'd haul diesel to the mine, drop the pup on the road a lot of times on the highway, or it depends on where I was going. There was a construction camp there. I almost lost a thumb one time when I was waiting for that pup to drop and the lever, and I put the ball valve and it released the brakes at the same time, and then that thing come up out of the pendle, and that glad hand unhooked out of there, and it shot out of there. That hose shot out of there, and it about took that thumb off, man, because they're made to kind of come off. Said it would. Whoa, man. Anyway, I backed the trailer back up, because hooking up by yourself up there on the road, kind of a, it's a project. You're just trying to get just right.
Yeah.
But anyway, go to the mine with the diesel, and then go to Anchorage and load the gasoline and come back up. That trip with diesel both ways, or diesel down and gas back, paid $4.10 or $4.20, and it'd take you half a day in the mine sometimes. So, but man, we were living. I mean, we were. That is better than. There in that times, the summer, you dealt with the traffic and the Turons and the people that, there's an eagle, slam on the brakes, try to, oh my gosh, I can't stop this thing, because they're looking at an eagle or a butterfly,
Seems like that happened a lot on that one bridge going across the Nenana there, right in the park. People would stop right where those cabins are at. There's so much stuff back there now, but...
Man,
come around the corner, there's people just stopped. You're like, oh, great.
I got a hurricane bridge story.
Okay.
So, you're grinding your way up through that. It's kind of a pull, and come up just as soon as you get up there close enough, are coming around that corner. And that's when all the tour buses would stop, and then it'd be wall-to-wall people. And even if whatever you were doing, 55 so on the southbound and probably 35 to 40 on the way up. And, I mean, there's everybody. I always say they're from Iowa and Nebraska and Timbuktu, and they're on there walking back and forth, and you got a set of doubles on, man. You're like, oh, my gosh, I'm going to take a grandma to Anchorage with me. You're just thinking, oh, no. And they get up and they're hanging onto the side of that bridge, and you blow by them southbound, and their shirts are up their backs, and their papers and stuff going everywhere, and you're hoping you don't collect somebody, and on the way up, I'd hit that bridge, and maybe hit the horn, and everybody just hanging on for life, Well, one year I was down there, and I thought, man, I just got to have a break. So I stopped on the southbound side of that. It was a wide spot there. And I thought, I'm going to walk out here. The tourists are all gone. It's quiet, I'm walking, looking around, taking some pictures, and I hear somebody grinding up the hill there, not too much. And about that time, I'm not worried about it, and it's a low boy, and he's got something heavy on. And he hit that bridge, but he was clipping along pretty good. When he hit that bridge, he started his bounce, and literally, I felt that bridge underneath my feet moving up and down. I felt that whole bridge, man. It wasn't just that low boy doing this. That bridge was moving. So I wonder what the people were feeling like when I hit it with 150 with a set of tankers. They're probably thinking they're going to bounce off that thing, because it really was a full experience of what it felt like for them and me, on Hurricane Bridge,
We come up there one time, and they were, might have been in the 90s probably, but they were bungee jumping off that bridge. We pulled up there, and they were just pulling the rope back up, and it was like, I guess they jump off the bridge as many times as they could before the cops showed up. They must have had somebody watching or something.
Oh, my gosh.
They weren't allowed to do it, but it was... I've seen that. I can still see them guys jumping off that bridge. That's a long ways off there.
Oh, man, it's down there. Yeah.
I know people would rappel off that, and they'd go camping down there too, but
Bungee jumping? Man.
How'd they walk out of there, you know?
Man, that's oh yeah, not for me.
Some of my good friends, they'd go under that Windy Creek Bridge, and they would just tie a rope there in the middle, and they'd sit up on top of the concrete there, you know, where right before it goes over, and they would swing out there. My buddy Cy, he's got videos on his Facebook of that with the GoPro camera. I'm like, you are nuts, but it looks so cool, you know, just swinging over that river. You ever do anything crazy like that?
No, other than falling off an iceberg down in Kenai with hip boots on in the middle of the winter, 7th grade, you know, I mean, you know, almost falling through the ice a dozen times. But, you know, I was going to say, you know, finishing off the parks, we did that, and it felt good to get off that North Road, because during some of that transition time between the state and Alyeska, that road was so bad. I mean, it was so rough, so dusty. The rocks and boulders were the size of, you know, grapefruits, cantaloupes, you know, basketball rocks. I mean, you'd get to Adigan and you were just wiped out, you know. But, you know, the parks was kind of a good break, except in the wintertime it was a challenge. And when that freezing rain, you know, for that transition over to Cantwell, you know. And you kind of roll along there pretty good along through Denali there, or McKinley now, and just 321 was a bad spot. But I'd never spun out on 321, I don't think. I could have. I probably did. But Bonanza at 335, that was a get you every time up in that cut. I'd come down through that bottom, swing out there into that other lane, and along that, in the summertime, you could fly down through there. And I'd hug that guardrail, and sometimes I'd get to Kobuck, and I had a step tank, and sometimes there would be branches in between the tank and that step bracket. I was into that guardrail so close, man. I was, you know, as a manual steering, you know, and you had the foot braced against that door, and you got everything you can on that thing to try to get 75 out of that bottom of that corner for that run, and get up there on top and make the first bench, you know. The summer was good. Wintertime, you never asked anybody what that hill was like, you know, unless they were tankers or somebody big and heavy. The Sealanders and all them guys, they just didn't have potato chips on, you know, or food, you know, so they weren't that heavy. But I could make the lower step, and man, there's more than one time I would stop just before I started up in the cut and put chains on, because I could see that corner up there, and it was going to be a no-show. You know, I was just not going to make it. But I carried, and it saved me more than one time. You know, I carried this wedge, this steel wedge about the size of the tire, and it was kind of homemade, and I bolted some teeth, you know, grater teeth, and made them with a torch, and back here, and that thing was, you know, just like a wheel chock, and it was just gnarly. And I kept it right in the sleeper, and it was always nice and warm in there. And if I spun out, after I slid backwards, I said, this is just going to be something simple. A fingernail will keep you from falling off a cliff, you know. And so the first time I used it was on 335, or maybe 321. And man, when I got out, by the time I could get my chains and stuff on that thing, I mean, that tire had pretty much swallowed that. Because I had a set of doubles on, you know, on a hill. I probably had chains before that, and it pretty much swallowed that chalk. But I was able to get a set on the back, you know, and then it was really kind of, you know, you had to kind of get off that thing or go forward. But if you could just get over that thing and get on your iron, it'd save you from sliding backwards. And I used it there on 335 and 321. You just couldn't make it if there was anything up there at all with the tankers like that. And I think the biggest time that saved me was on after I got off the parks and I went up the haul road. We started in that 84 model, and that I love that truck. It had the air window, and really the first time that I met Billy Zolman, we was at Hilltop. He wasn't working for us, and I don't know who he was working for, but I was filling up at Hilltop, and it was my first or second trip with that truck. And maybe it was a little bit later, but whatever. He climbed up on that step, and he's like, "Whoa, man." The window fell down, and Lord, oh man, it was just like I had the dog of the walk that year. That was so cool. And but once later on, Billy was working for us, and I spun out on 2.5 miles. As soon as I got that hump, man, would get me every time. I could get the truck over that thing, and as soon as that tanker started to rise on that hump there, 2.5 miles, and it just. And so I was leading all the Philco drivers. I was their leader. Pretty much. Leonard back there, and then Billy, and so I got up there. It wasn't that marginal. It didn't seem like it, but spun out. And guys talk about when you're shaking. Yeah, I shooken before. On the parks, in places you couldn't even hardly get the clutch to work once you got ironed up. Anyway, so I put that chalk underneath that, and man, I mean that thing would have slid off 2.5 mile that night, and that thing had just gouged into that thing, and I hollered on the radio, and I had actually backed down a little bit or got off that thing. I hollered for Billy. I said, "Man, come up here and help me, man. I'm in a bind." And it's a run. I didn't really realize how far it is from the other side of the hill, down that hill and then back up. Oh,
he was on 1 mile.
Yeah. And about the time I got all that thing chained up and straightened up again, he comes running up the hill. He gets up in that flat part right there, and he's about dead, breathing and huffing and puffing, But that thing saved me there for sure.
Was he dressed warm for that?
Probably in his, night clothes or something lightweight like that. He was never really set to go out there and just brave the elements. I had refrigerator. I wore a bunny boot on this side during the cold days because my foot was like ice on that old 78. It froze your foot on that door. And then John put them little red dot heaters finally right here by the seat. Oh, and that was so nice. I could keep that foot warm, because when the weather was bad, it'd blow in them older trucks. You'd finally get to where you're going, you'd have a pillow covered with snow, and I mean it was a speck of light about the size of an eye drop, but it let in a foot of snow back there, and you're like, where does all that come from? And then talking about more cold, that old white Peterbilt that John had, all the buttons and the screws in the sleeper would have white frost on them in the bunk. There just wasn't anything back there, for insulation. And then, when it got 50, 60 below zero, it was cold,
So Billy came to chain you up on 2.5.
He was working on it.
But you had already chained up.
I got her straightened up. And I'll tell you what, that was a shake time there. I had my Chinaman slippers on. That time too, kitchen cook, I would call them Chinaman slippers or kitchen cook slippers, But I was ready for a good night. Road was good, everything was the way to go, I was like, hey, we're gonna make it. And they always put me out there in front, hey, I got one more thing to do here before you leave, So okay, and then as soon as I get going, they're like, well, here we go, follow this guinea pig up the road, But that was, anyway, so I didn't get a chance to follow too many people. But talk about following. So we were tired, and I was probably with Billy and maybe one of the Philco drivers. I'm pretty sure it was Billy. And I was beat, and I was leading. And so they went by. I pulled in at the river, and then they cooked on by. Well, I got out and, checked the drain and looked it all over again. I thought, okay, it's late. It's, late in the night, early in the morning. So I pulled in behind him, and got her sacked a little bit back there. And then I see these taillights up there. I knew it is. And so I said, hey, northbound. Yeah. When I get up here a little closer, I'm gonna try to get up in here around you. I said, I'm really tail heavy. I got this load out of this, the States, and it's tail heavy, but I'm probably lighter than you, so I'm gonna get up around you here. And man, pretty soon, man, we are flying. He ain't gonna let me around him, all the way to Mackey. He's like, I'm gonna come around you here to the top of the hill, man. Boom, down they go. I'm pretty sure it was Billy, but
And he didn't know it was you.
no,
huh?
he didn't know his move, because I changed my voice, and I learned that from Joe. Because Joe was a voice changer, and Joe was a guy that he'd be driving along and you'd think he was halfway to Prospect and he's behind you. He would come out the other entrance at Coldfoot when we're headed south, and he's like, "You're meeting one up here pretty soon." And I was like, "Man, I'm just driving I ain't even met nobody yet, You should be getting him pretty soon here, And anyway, and then you're driving along between he did this here and there, and it'd be a nice moon, it'd be a nice night, and you're going towards Gobblers, kind of nice section there, and you kind of hear this. You look out and there's that dang blue Western Star right beside you, and then he flicks the lights on. And you're like, God, it's a good thing I'm on my side of the road. I could have killed us both, You didn't know I was behind you, did you?
That's funny. My dad's son does that.
Which one?
It's not me.
Well, we did some wild things. We would come back when we were all three together. We would deck up a truck. Each time we'd deck somebody else's up, and all through the year, we'd deck up. And I don't remember who started doing this first. It was me or John. And we'd get out of the truck we were riding in and climb down the chain racks, get up on the deck, and get on the flatbed and get in the truck. I got pictures of John getting up on the. I got up inside of inside the Boogie Motel and went to sleep. And I was
while you're decked up.
Yeah, while you're decked up,
Yeah.
I just bunk out and get the cold foot because in John's Pete, man, it was just an old straight sleeper with no air ride back there on that. And man, if you try to sleep around that again and anywhere up there, your face would literally be raw from the pillow, and if you had a 3-day beard or so, you'd just be so sore just sitting back there just vibrating and grinding, just you couldn't sleep, couldn't rest. It just rubbed you to pieces. So climb out and say, I'm going to get back in here and get my lunch or sandwich, or I'm going to go take a nap. One time I was sleeping back there, and it was snowing, so I got up and sat in the driver's seat of F-29, and then it was snowing, and John pulled over at the top of the knob and said, "We better get you up front," because I was like, if we're gonna wreck it, I want to be where I can hang on, But yeah, we did some things like that, and get back and forth in there, and then pull up behind you, and Joe was good at that. I never did that. I just couldn't trust the guy in front of me to stay in his lane,
I've heard some crazy stories like that. I know my brother's pretty good at changing his voice.
Just depends.
So you talk about voices and names, but the name that came along to me was Bill Klobadotcher. And I use that name a lot. And my brother-in-law, Dale, I don't know how he come up with that name or if he knew somebody named Bill Klobadotcher.
So he gave that name to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
He gave that name to me. So, and I would call Billy Klob, and he would call me Klob, Hey, Klob, so everybody was Klob. And so when we would go out to the west side docks and go to the checkpoint, and they'd give, what's your name, drilling mud haulers and what have you, and I'd say, Bill Klobadotcher. And the guard would laugh. And then one or two of them would kind of giggle, and he said, spell that. And I'd say, Klobadacher, Klobadotcher. They'd write it down, and I'd go all the way out there and unload whatever I was unloading, and when I'd come back, they'd say, name, Sean Pierson. So Bill Klobadotcher was always still in there all the time.
They're probably still looking for him.
He's like, has anybody seen Bill Klobadotcher in 1983 or 4,
So would you use that name talking to guys on the radio too, or what?
Clob was kind of the name that guys hung on me a little bit here and there, especially Billy. He always called me Clob, you know. And then and some guys would say, hey, Boogie Motel, you know. And, you know, but Shaun, I don't know if I had any real handles. I can't remember, you know, maybe, you know, but...
Kloppenotcher. He's still out on the field.
I could spell it, and that blew them away, you know. K-L-O-B, you know.
So what did Dad probably had a couple nicknames too? Didn't people call him Smoking Joe?
You know, Snow Rider was one of them, you know. No Riders was Snow Rider, you know. It turned into No Riders. They put snow up there. Remember that on that food service truck? Snow Rider. Joe was the FBI, and John was the Dreamer, you know. That was his. Or he liked to go by the Undertaker. You
John?
that? John did, yeah. He said, "I'll be the last one to let you down." He did that. I remember John was saying he was the Undertaker. I'll be the last one to let you down. So it kind of hung, you know.
So he would change his voice a little bit too then.
I think we were all goofballs then, you know. I mean, driving up that road, sometimes it was so intense, you know, and the road and the mud and the traffic and the rocks and the beating and banging. I mean, you just had to have some humor, you know. By the most part, everybody was pretty good along with getting along, you know. I mean, it didn't really matter. Then and there, the guys really stuck together. I mean, there was a separation during some of them years, but I didn't really matter what company they were working for too much, you know. I mean, if they were in a 9-line bind, you just had to, you know.
Yeah.
And
everybody looked after everybody up there.
Yeah, and you could tell somebody's, somebody might be a little bit newer, younger, but by the most part, most of the people in my generation that started it came out of Montana or, you know, Idaho or Oregon, Washington. You know, they dealt with logging and hills and, you know, jakes and chains and stuff, so they had a pretty good idea. You know, it was just running I-10. You could have, you know, 10 million miles on I-10 and spin out on Hagelberger. You know, when you see that hill, you're like, oh my gosh. But really, that's nothing compared to what's coming after you get over the side of that hill. You know.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
But, you know, I guess I could talk about the wrecks. John had a 40-foot tanker. And somehow somebody had slid the suspension back so it got that extra 5 feet, and then they put a lift axle up front somehow in that tanker, and then they put this structure beam with a ladder, which always broke. It always broke that tanker. It was welded up there to that tanker. It was always cracked, leaking diesel down the side of that thing. But since it was 40 feet, you could lid that thing out all the way. So it was always on the edge of being a heavy in the back. Well, when after I got out of F-29, a young man started driving F-29, and he really didn't have a lot of haul road experience. I didn't think. I've never seen him drive for anybody else. And the first time that truck got wrecked was on the shelf. One of the other Philco drivers told him to chain up for the shelf, and he disregarded. And he got up there just about, you know, up in the guardrail, up in the curve, and spun out. And it came back. Excuse me. It came back and landed right down there, you know, where they always land down there at the end of the parking lot down in that area. And 2 times that tanker broke the centers out of them fifth wheels. I don't know how many times you've ever seen that in your life, but I've seen that twice, and that tanker did it. That tanker would take them fifth wheels and break it open just like that when they would roll off there.
Wow.
It did it on F-29, and it did it on F-31, which was the White Pete when John spun out on Mackey. John spun out on Mackey, and it was probably a guaranteed should have chained up, but he tried getting her back. I remember he said he tried to get her back, but finally just got away from him, and then went off on that what would have been the west side, the left side. When it went in there, it broke that tanker off and flipped it over on its back or side. And that thing had been on its side 3 times, and I've been involved in almost every one of, I think I'd been involved in every one of the recoveries and there at the wreck site. And so when John and I stopped on the way back, John was still in the sleeper and waiting for Keith Harvey with the dozer and to get pumped off. I think maybe me and Joe pumped him off. I don't remember. But John, that truck was leaning like this in the snow, not even hurt. But since the oil pipe on him Cummins was down on this side, he was able to just kind of lay up there in the bit, lay the mattress back and then sleep kind of in a hammock back there with the heater on and everything, because the motor was still being oiled. Now the other side, when it was on 44 mile, and don't forget to tell me about that story on 44, when it was on that other side, couldn't do it. But anyway, that tanker broke that fifth wheel 2 times. And then when Merle the squirrel, he had many years down here in the States, but that's what his nickname was. On his probably second or ish trip by himself, he went off the road at 11 mile, going down 11 mile, and laid that on the side. That was Custer's silver truck.
Oh, okay.
John had bought that, and then I believe we took the sleeper off, and then eventually it got painted white. I think we put a sleeper on it and made it white again, painted white. But Merle wrecked that thing. First he lost a push rod, probably could have been over jaking it on top of, he parked it on top of Finger, yeah, and then bobtailed back, no phones, no service, nothing like that. So he left a fully loaded tanker on top of Finger and headed back to North Pole with a broken push tube. And then John and Walt, did miracle workers, and then they got that thing going again. And, when he come back with another tanker, he was probably wiped out tired. And he was coming off 11 mile, like I did when I was there 5 mile an hour waiting for the edge of the earth to show up, And, suddenly just, you could just see the tracks, just laid it over. But that Boogie Motel was there to pick that up. I was down at the border, and the strangest thing with the CBs and stuff. So I was down there, and I dropped off the fuel at the Doyon camp or something down there doing the road, and talking on the radio to Steve Olson. So Steve Olson left about the same time I left to go down that direction, but he went north, and I was like, man, I'm talking to him like he's just right around the corner. But he's all the way up there, up there by Sag, and the road's washing out, And I was like, where are you at? And he said, I'm up here, around Pump 2, the road's washing out, between here and Prudhoe, like it does up there. And I'm down there at Toke and Northway. And then we were just, right around that Toke Junction and where them radio was. The reason why they told me they put them big towers there, because it was so magnetically placed that they could talk to ships around the world from them big 400-footers.
Huh, really?
Yeah, it was just amazing. That's what them guys would tell us there at Toke when we were there. So I believed it. That skip was amazing. I talked to people down in, Montana right there, just on the radio, like you're just right next door. But anyway, so I got closer to town. I don't remember what happened, but that's when they said, get the low boy, go to 11 mile. Merle's wrecked the Custer's truck, so I dropped my tanker and threw on whatever we could, and I bet I took the dozer, somebody's little dozer. Might have been Keith's dozer up there, because we pulled it over with that. There was a dozer in them pictures, but we never saw Merle after that. He went back to the States. It was going to be too much. I get that,
You ever have any head-ons or anything when you were driving up there?
No head-ons, but I had a side-on, if that counts.
You want to talk about that?
Well, I got to go back about probably 15 miles up the hill before I start tell you about the head-on or the side-on. So John goes on vacation, and Joe and I are, we're the bag holders, That's just how we were, the bag holders. So John and Glenda, they went on vacation to Hawaii. Well, drivers, I don't know where drivers are. I don't know any drivers other than the guys we know. Well, John found a driver. I've never seen her before, and it was a her. And I think I'm pretty sure her name was Leah. And she was a tough one, She'd probably been around chains and loggers and stuff like that, So I think he might have test drove her a time or two, and so Joe and I were going to babysit her for a week or two while John and Glenda were on vacation. And I think we made a trip or two, maybe. I can't remember, but so Joe would lead, she would be in the middle, and she was driving F-31, the white Peterbilt with the 400 in it. That one came out of British Columbia. It had the strangest sounding Jake. Joe always said it sounded like a Detroit. It was just a weird sound. The mufflers could have been different for Canada. I don't know. But it hurts your ears, Speaking of ears, I used to wear earmuffs because it was so loud in them trucks, and the Jakes, and I used to wear headsets, and my ears were just killing me after 2 days of them rocks, But anyway, so we were on our way home. We stop in. We had mud loads on. We all had flatbeds. So there's a half a dozen of us. We all checked in at the river, and we're leaving. And I'm up on probably 47, and Leah's up there in front of me. And then I hear her say, "I'm gonna come around you here, southbound." Okay, Missy. All right. And I was like, man, there's not a lot of room between here and 44 Mile to, it's kind of it was a couple of them loopy doopies, and I thought, oh man, a gut feeling, you get that, man, she's new at this, man. She's passing right here. Well, she's trying to get an eye on Joe, we're all going the same way. You don't need. And then, holy shoot. Man, she hit that corner at 44 Mile, and she never even turned. She come off that thing. Man, it's just, when you get there, man, it's there. And she managed to try to do a little of this, so she jackknifed that thing right over that edge, all the way to the bottom. And I don't know what she said on the radio, if nothing, but maybe somebody said, hey, one of your trucks is, Anyway, so I pulled into the parking lot down there at the bottom, and everybody, sickled on by. And the snow was deep, luckily, that year. When she turned the truck off and climbed out of there, you couldn't even hardly open that door. The door was like a submarine door, man. It was just, that driver's door was like pretty much straight up and down. So the people at the river came and looked at it. They said there's no way they could get her out of there. The snow's too deep. The road's going to be blocked. We can't pull her up back this hill. So Joe and I and Leah, and we dug from that flat spot parking lot. We snow shoveled, and we didn't have any axes and hatchets or nothing for all them willows and what have you down there, so we pretty much broke them and whatever. And we shoveled for a day and a night. I don't even know what we did for food. Probably had food in the truck, and some water. And Leah had to sleep in that floorboard of Joe's Western Star, because I had to, miniature crawl through back there back then, a Boogie Motel. And so we finally got a road dug down in there so the guy from the river could back down in there and start pulling her, getting her back up, and then he would winch her back up through that direction, through that snow. Got her on the top up there after about 2 days. It froze solid, all of us, man. It was cold. And I'm glad Billy wasn't with us, because he'd have been watching, sitting there in his, slippers from the window. And I got a couple more stories about Billy with no winter clothes. But so we get her up there, and we turn the south wind heater on and get the motor warmed up and dig all the snow out from the hood and what have you, And so, we're good to go. High-fiving, slapping backs, and Joe takes off, Leah takes off, and I get that old F-29 in there, and man, it's stiff, it's cold, man. It had manual steering. I always say it had the steering box the size of a grapefruit, and it was just, you could bear, sometimes one time I was coming off the shelf and it was cold, and I started jackknifing at the corner, man, and I turned that thing to the left and my rear end came off the seat. I mean, that thing was so hard to turn that, well, I had arms like the Hulk, man, after 5 years of driving that thing, manual steering. And anyway, so we're cooking along through there, and I'm trying to get warmed up, get the heaters on, Anyway, we get down in the 30s. I know it was around 30. I heard it was 35 mile. And Joe says something on the radio. And usually when Joe says something on the radio, this is what you get. What was that? He talks before he keys up, He done that to me on Happy Man when he told me to chain up, and I spun out when I had John's white Pete on the deck, But I got to the gravel pit. That's another story. Don't forget to tell me that one. But so anyway, he said something, and I'm kind of being alert, and I'm coming up around that 35 mile, and that corner was slanted like that, and the road was good and cold, but the tire chain marks, from the northbounders when they were running iron, they just had ruts down to the brown, and then the humps were the ruts. And I come into that corner kind of up on the side, kind of high where I should have been, but my trailer was working my way to try to get out of the way, but I didn't know it was coming. But I just knew to stay on your side on every hill and, railroad tracks or whatever. And man, and all of a sudden, man, just like that, here comes this Kenworth, man. I mean, it's moving. It was John Moore's Kenworth with the Aerodyne with the big V8 in it, and it was Dwight Busby. He lived out there in North Pole near us at the Badger Apartments. But man, I did what I could do to turn that F-29, but it wasn't I wasn't going fast enough to really make quick adjustments. It was too slow. And the trailer was still down close to that rut. When I met Dwight, he was already crowded his side. I could tell when he came around that corner, he'd already saw me, and he was either making adjustments or already knew where he needed to be. And he made it past me pretty good until he got down there towards the end of the trailer. I think the front axle hit his front wheel on it. Boom, it's, oh, shoot, and debris was flying. I don't know what all happened back there, fiberglass, maybe a headlight, And so I got up there right up on the top, and Dwight got down there and on the bottom. So we walked back in the middle there and picked up what we could, and I think we made some quick repairs to get him going, And luckily, he had a tanker on it, and there would have been no way that he couldn't give me any more, So it was a good meeting. There wasn't any showdown or nothing. Draw 6 sons on each other.
He didn't pull out his boxing gloves.
No.
Okay.
Had a Dwight. Anyway. And I knew John Moore through Joe and everybody, and John was he was one of them guys that if you knew John, you knew a legend. You knew a guy that, back then was, he could be your friend, and he knew what he was doing, and he'd been there, So Dwight got going, and the rest of his story was the truck came back, and they made it. And luckily nobody was injured, and it wasn't any worse than that. So I met John Moore up there at Jeffrey's a day or so later, and we went out there and had coffee, and he said, okay, it's probably, Dwight was probably, maybe moving or, whatever, not going to blame each other. Both of you is 50%, And so I said, okay, I'm good with that, I mean, I was over, I should have been a foot more better. One thing I always want to remember was to be as truthful as you could about everything. He's like, well, I didn't hit you. You had, but there was no way. I was too young in life. I would have never done that because, I mean, you could make yourself a miserable life up there if you start doing something like that to guys. But, yeah. So John got an air cleaner from Frontier, And I got the paint and fiberglass and fixed his headlight bucket and put the stripes back on it. And in a weekend, I had him going back again, and everybody was happy and I was happy. And I think I bought a wheel and a tire, that was about it. And I think he had a lug nut or two, but it could have been way worse. But, that turned out to be that side on. But I learned a valuable lesson there, when John and Joe taught me when I was first driving, man, at the top of every hill, you be on your lane, and every side of the corner, you be on your side, And I tried to always practice that, but at that time, I just was just that little bit off, man. All it took was 10 inches or 6 inches, whatever it was. But
that road was so narrow back then, too.
Yeah, and the crowns were always weird, The crowns were always, strange. Run them in them 30s, Them 30s were really narrow, like there at Chucky's Corner. I mean, that was just, just pretty much almost a 90 when you got down in that, corner there.
So that was the same trip when you guys spent all that time on 44 Mile. You get that truck back on the road and drive 10 miles.
And then I wreck.
It's like, man, are we ever going to get home?
Yeah, and that was... to me, that was a long 2 days digging snow. It was, waist deep down there, and she just, man, when she went off that thing, man, it was over. The whole thing was down there in the bottom.
Did you ever ask Dad what he said on the radio later on?
Probably would have said something like, "Hey, in English, you're meeting somebody."
I just didn't know if he had a nickname for Dwight and said this guy is coming at you or something like that. What was Dwight's nickname back then? Did he have one?
That would have been a good question the other day.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Probably the Busby.
The Busby. Well, one of them times, talking about Busbys, I was down at the river, and that night that I was so cold, my first trip, there was a guy down there that came in and checked in while I was checking in, and he was 4-star terminals, and it was a Peterbilt with a Detroit V12 in it, and it had Buzzin' Dozen painted on the hood. I just remember that thing, how loud that thing was when he left the river. Long hood, they had extra long hoods on them, probably with like these right here, extended hoods, now. But
so you keep saying checking in at the river, and back then you had to check in, right, at a guard shack?
I think you brought your paperwork or a permit in, signed a sheet of paper because from the river north was still owned by the companies, the Aliaskas. They weren't no public unless you had a permit north of the river.
Okay.
And then later they moved it to Dietrich, and then the next thing the politicians and the road people said it's a state road now, so it's open. And them first few years when they opened it to everybody, it was challenging. People didn't have no tires, they had no gas, they had no food, and they were going up there like, hey man, I'm going to Prudhoe Bay, but there was no place for them to go up there, like the Brooks Range Supply was the only possible place you could go. Maybe, unless you were going into a camp or a motel, you had no permission to go anywhere,
That makes you wonder how Dick Mackey got up there, because he would have had to sign in at the river. He must have got a permit or something to do that.
Well, I don't know how he got the restaurant started. I really don't. I just remember the very first time that I went there was, I think with Joe, but I took my dad with us on a trip. We had bridge beams. At the time we hauled some of the heaviest loads we hauled, your dad, and uncle, and myself, we hauled these bridge beams to, it could have been Arco. And Joe had that blue Western Star, and well, he had that thing. He had some horsepower under the hood of that thing. And he was so proud of that thing. Anyway, I got a 44 mile story about that thing. So one time I drove that truck for Joe and had a load of something that wasn't really heavy. And man, I was loving that thing, man. That thing had the power. Driving that old stretched out 350 was quite different, I got in that Western Star, man. You could pass people, Instead of telling them to come around, you could pass people back then, Well, I come up through that 44 mile, man, and I just about missed the corner at the bottom of that hill. That thing was going probably 45 miles an hour up that hill, man. And I was like, holy shoot, I had to let off, otherwise I was going to go straight off the edge going northbound.
It was like a 30 or 35 mile an hour corner. I can't remember. It was sharp.
It was, a pretty good switch. But when I come into that first corner, man, I was like, I had to get off the gas, otherwise I was going to go into the ditch. But with them other 400s and stuff, man, you shoot 2 miles down the hill, you're already in your pulling gear, You're just like... I used to tell my brother-in-law Terry, when he worked at the Slope Mountain and Adigan camp, and I'd see him at home, with my sister and all, and I'd say, Terry, could you just put the gravel down a little bit further for guys like us? He said, no, I can't gravel the whole dang hill for you guys, I just get the tops, I was like, man, just, about the time I get into second, I was like, oh, shoot, 60 more feet, please. Just please, man, I just got to get there, Once you get in that rock, you're like, oh, you just kind of breathe easy, when I was young like that, I'd leave town, and, I'd have everything in chronological error. I was like, I know you couldn't tell every hill what it was like, but, you might chit-chat with somebody and say, hey, like when you're leaving Livengood, you'd say, what'd the ice cut look like? That's 2 days away, It's like, I was like, well, when I came over 2 days ago, I had rock on it, because we didn't make all that time back then, we didn't have the horsepower, the jakes, but it took us, it was a good 12 hours to get home, empty. And then, going north, if the roads were, Yankee, and you had a little horsepower, you just chain it up, and hopefully you could try to make close to the ice cut, on that first day, if you left at sunup, in the wintertime. You grind off them hills, but them old engines, you just pretty much, like I said, you're almost in reverse. You're just going so slow that you just can barely, you just idling off there, and and then you put that thing on full jake and have your foot hovering over that brake and just waiting for something to either brake, slide, or change directions. Happy Man, I took a few good quick trips off Happy Man before, hope that you got enough time to get it under control at the gravel pit, but there's others that didn't. I'd see, one time at 26 mile, there's a trailer there with the tires on fire. Somebody came off that thing and they just left their trailer and went to the river or went home, still sitting there smoldering.
That's why there's not more stories off that hill.
There's a lot of stories. It's just you got to talk to the people that were on that road. It's like we just really talked to Dad, and when they stopped, what was that, 92 or 93 when they stopped coming off Happy Man, when they redid the road?
I almost think it was 93, but I can't. It might have been 92.
Yeah, I don't really remember that. I just remember Dad would be like, that was Happy Man. We had a lot of issues coming off. He's always talking about that. You could see it and you're like, oh, okay.
Well, I was with Dad that trip. We went north, come off Happy Man, we come back, we went the other way, and it was kind of neat to be a part of that.
Going around it?
Yeah, when they finally opened up the new part, it's like, man, that was cool.
This past summer, everybody was going on Happy Man because of the construction. So it was kind of cool to come off that thing and be like, man, this thing is steep.
Yeah.
But it was summertime. So
try it when it's slippery.
Yeah.
And snowing. And I spun out on Happy Man one night, and we decked up in Prudhoe, and I was driving John's White Pete, and we kind of switched it back and forth. And it was snowing pretty hard all the way from Coldfoot, and I knew it. I had a dream the night before. I was going to spin out somewhere. You're just always you're thinking it or dreaming it, And so, that whole trip all the way down towards Livengood, man, I'm just feeling them, checking them every hill, got that squall handle down a little bit. And so, man, we're just going up there, and we've been awake all this way since Prudhoe, and Joe's leading. And, man, we're making a run for Happy Man. I'm coming up down through the little bit, just coming into the gravel pit there. And all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, the radio's up on full blast. I hear this, and it was Joe. I was like, what? You know, and it startled me, and I let off the pedal, you know. And about that time, John comes out of the bunk. He said, "You better get on it." And man, I was already on it, you know. And man, I sickle up that thing, you know, maybe drop one, maybe get two, get up there just almost into that corner, and then just, boy, you're losing it. You know, and about that time, man, we hit the brakes, you know, and he's out, I'm out. It's snowing. And
was he at least dressed, or was he?
Well, John was, yeah.
He just got out of bed.
He just got off the bunk, you know. Kind of like when I was teaming with Jordan. Jordan go back there 8.5 hours and never see him. I mean, I had to get up and hit the can, you know, about every 80 miles, you know. When you get 65, that's what happens. But anyway, Jordan go back there and he's like, "What state are we in?" I was like, "Well, you know, I drove my 770 tonight, you know, okay." But when you're driving with John, it had some adventures, you know. Well, we got chained up on Happy Man, but what Joe said in English was, "I wipe pretty bad up here. You better chain up." Oh. And so when I got to where he was probably wiping, it was over with, you know. But luckily, trailer brakes were dry, and I had a deck truck on there, you know, so we didn't have a spill. But we got it chained up, went over the top, and then sickled it down. But another time I was teaming, coming back, and John was in the bunk, and everything's great. You're up there all by yourself, just thinking your thoughts in life, you know, coming southbound, and we got a trailer or a truck decked up there, you know, and all of a sudden, John flies out of the sleeper, man. He starts grabbing the steering wheel like he's half asleep, man. I was like, "Whoa, man! What? I'm going up at again. I'm on the pipe crossing almost, you know." And he comes out of there and starts grabbing the wheel like he's gonna drive up there, you know. He's not even awake, you know. He had some adventures sometimes when he come out of that bunk. You know,
must have been having a nightmare.
Well, probably watching me drive was a nightmare, you know.
Did you ever have any funny stories about learning to shift when you were driving with my dad?
Well, I spun out on Prospect. No, I missed a gear on Prospect with that cab over. And that's one you just never miss. But when you have a 350, you got to use your transmission on them old hills, you know. No. So we come down through the knob, maybe met somebody, I don't know, and got up there. Luckily, it was about 20, 30 below zero. And a cab over's got about 7.5 feet of an 1.5-inch rod and a couple of U-joints and a bungee cord, you know. And you just, you know, it's like this, you know. Kind of, you know. So anyway, I'm new. I'm still being trained, you know. Yeah. And I get up there on Prospect, you know, and sure enough, nothing. There's nothing there. I don't know if I missed it from the high to the low, whatever. And so I, you know, put her back in low and let out on it, and we went right up the top of the hill. Luckily, you know, it was cold, good traction. But, you know, missing gears, I was pretty good at shifting. That old 13 speed was pretty reliable when I first learned, and then the 15 speed, I loved that thing. Man, it had the shifter lever on the dash. It didn't have it here. So I learned how to shift that thing, man. I love that thing, man, because if you wanted to go and stay in that normal high side, you could flip that lever, leave the shifter right here, clutch that thing, and it would go into like 3rd and a half. And then if you had to go down, it was just one pull backwards. And that's where we had to go a lot of times, you know. And that way you didn't have to do all this, you know, high to low and, you know, Hail Mary and everything. But you could just, that lever, clutch it, it'd be there, and then one back. And then you could go forward again, lever it, and then by that time you're up in the hill where you had a little bit more control, you know. But with the 84 model, it had it on the shifter. But it had 456 gears in it. Yeah, 456s instead of 463s. But it had 456s in it with 44s. And that made a truck out of it. And once it got a locker, it was good, you know.
That changed everything, huh?
Yeah, it was night and day. Yeah. And I love that old truck. You know, it had a Sealy Posturepedic mattress in it, man. And, oh, man, what a night you could have with that thing, man. I mean, it was just like better than them old foam ones, you know. your back's all cratered, and have a double bunk, and I didn't have to change head bolts every night on it,
Yeah.
And it was pretty reliable. Didn't have any engine trouble with it. And I eventually learned how to drive that thing because it drove so different from the 400s that were so yanked up, with lots of pump pressure and RPMs was so high. First time I really had a learning experience with that thing is I learned how to drive that. No schooling, nobody told you how to do that, but it had the twin turbos on it, so it would pull with that compound turbos. It could get down there lower in the 1500, 1600 RPM. Well, I'm going up the knob with a lot of cushion, like we normally do, and I got up there past the driveway on the side, and I was, headed up towards the corner, and started slipping a tanker on in the snow, and it slipped and caught, but it stayed around 1400, and I didn't let off. I stayed there, man, and that thing just rumbled and just shuddered and just, it was like, wow. I figured the headliner screws were going to start backing out because it was really turning. I was almost feel like I could feel every throw of that U-joint, man, because it was probably putting the torque that it had, maybe 1650 back then, was a lot.
Yeah.
This was 1850, but now it's 2050 and probably more, But when I found that out, I was like, wow. And one time, it was just a great engine because I coming back with that 4-axle tanker, and I was on Happy Man, and man, I was flying up that thing, and then I started slipping, and I was like, oh man, I'm at 1100, and it's barely running. Now 400 would ran backwards about there. It would have stopped and went backwards. That thing was at 1100. It was just silent, and I was just like, just doing the seat, man. I was like, please, just a little bit further.
That kind of thing helps, doesn't it, when you're going up the hill?
It makes you feel like it's helping. I'm just like leaning and pushing,
And you're pushing harder on the throttle pedal?
Oh, man. It's like, wow, I won that one, because I just, and that thing didn't quit.
Yeah.
But it was not really its power band, but it didn't die. When they power out them old straight cams like that, they just powered out one turbo.
Yeah.
But it had some sort of variable timing, I think, and that changed the dimetrics of the camming and stuff, and made them things develop some power. But you want me to tell you about the story with that Hagelberger coming off behind John?
Yeah, why don't you tell that story, and then we'll kind of end this one. We're going to have to come back and interview you again here maybe tomorrow. We'll talk some more.
I got to get across the Colville River.
Yeah, you still need to get across the Colville River. That's a funny inside joke.
At least you're almost warmed up now, so now you kind of know how to do this.
So anyway, I was driving the Red Pete, and I had test drove. I believe this is how it went. I had test drove a guy that had drove the haul road, and John always seemed to always have me test drive these guys. So I test drive these 2 or 3 guys, and I thought they were pretty seasoned, but when they scared me a little bit, or made some what I would call rookie mistakes, I just, I thought, okay, well, he can get over it, or whatever. But so I test drove this guy, and we left Hilltop. He was driving, and that red truck was pretty new, still under the warranty probably, and he got out of Hilltop, kind of coasted and started down the hill there, and I was like, something, he's not in a gear yet. Well, he lets the clutch out, and he's probably still in about second or third, and that truck just went and it just and dove the front wheel down, and then he clutched it again and went a few gears. Well, from there, the next little whiles had a noise, and the clutch was weird. We either made Coldfoot or Prudhoe. I can't remember. But anyway, I made another trip, and I believe either the clutch went or the rear end went. So I got it hauled back, and the test drive guy, he's gone. And so something broke in the truck, so we decked it up somewhere, and I can't even remember who got me to Hilltop. Somehow we got a hold of Whiskey Runner and the radio range and the people, And so John comes up there, and he's got that little blue F-150 with the 6-cylinder 4-wheel drive short bed. Remember that? Okay, so he pulls me off this trailer at Hilltop, gets me off there. The loading docks they're treacherous, in most places, There's too much space, not enough wood, it's never perfect height. So anyway, John is going to pull this thing disabled. I have no drivetrain. I can run the engine and have idling and brakes, So he's going to pull me to General Parts from Hilltop. Okay. All right. So we work our way down from Hilltop, and we're on a chain. And, man, he grinds by the scale there, and we're gonna hit Hagelbarger. And it's frosty. It's frosty. It's slick. It is not, and I'm back there in that 26,000-pound empty weight Peterbilt. That's what that thing weighed, 26,000. That thing was heavy. And so... Man, we hit Hagelbarger going south, man, and John, he's just, we don't even get up to the split in the brick there, and he spun out, So unhook, I back down, I think he pulls me backwards. We tried that hill 4 or 5 times, at least maybe more. And John would say, okay, we're going to go from high range to low range. And I think that little truck had a locker in the back, And so, man, we fly up that thing again, and he's over here, and he's over there, and he's just spinning, and we're just grinding our way. He's just swinging from side to side, And he's in this side, and he's over here, and then we back down again. And every time we might make it a little further, but the hill looked hilarious. I mean, it was just, it was just everywhere. That little Ford was just high range to low range, and he's yanking that transfer case, and the truck's jerking. I was like, this is crazy, just crazy. So finally, after how many attempts, we get to the top of Hagelbarger. It's a miracle, man. We just burned our way to the top of that hill. That little 6-cylinder just about to melt down, I was like, okay, it's just how we do things up here. So we start off the top of that thing, and I can't remember because we didn't let off. And I didn't know really to this day whether he was in the low range in that transfer case or high range. Because when we started off the top of that hill, it was so slick I couldn't even touch my brakes. And I was already overrunning him. I couldn't. I'd touch the brakes, and they'd lock up, and then I'd start that swing. And the chain, I know it was just, I am on him. I can't even see the tailgate. I am on him. The chain's jumping between us. He's floored. And, I touch the brakes, and we start this oof, 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 left and right on that ice. And we're flying off that thing. And I was just like, I'm going to land in their living room, These little houses over here. And I was like, trying to hold that thing. Every time I touch the brakes, it skid, And then I start that oof, spinning that death swing, Finally, we got down to the flats of that thing, man. You just have all these experiences of like these near misses, day after day after day with that, And we finally get down. He pulls me all the way to General Parts, man. I don't know whether we were laughing or crying. We were just so relieved that we made that thing. We didn't die coming off that hill and all chained together in someone's living room, on the side of Hagelbarger. But that. Well, we had good times, and so
saved a little bit of money on the tow bill, huh?
$40. We needed probably a clutch and an engine and a couple pair of underwear, and but that was a good night. But man, we did the get her done days. We just hey, we're going to get this done. We're going to right or wrong, safe or unsafe, but we did so many things that you just can't attempt today, pulling a Peterbilt up Hagelbarger with a 150 in the ice.
Oh, man.
Well, we're going to record again tomorrow or probably later this evening and be part 2 or just a different episode number. We'll figure it out.
Brisket should be good.
The brisket is good. Yeah, we cooked a brisket last night.
Yeah, we got to go.
We have to go. So, Shaun, thanks for doing this.
Oh, man.
Thanks for showing up. And actually, we're at your house, so.
Appreciate you.
All right, we'll see you later.
Okay, Roger.
See ya.
That's hilarious.
I forgot about the brisket.